Now we all know Chinese bikes are rubbish, but how bad are they really? Now we rode from Cape Town in South Africa to Cairo in Egypt over 3 months, 9,600 miles to find out. And in this video I want to share our 7 major breakdowns that we encountered on this trip. Hi, I'm Francois from adventurebiketroop.com, and in this video I'm just going to chat about the 7 major breakdowns we faced on our Chinese delivery bikes on our Cape to Cairo trip. Now we bought 2 brand new 200cc Chinese delivery bikes. They look like the old Suzuki GN250s, almost exactly the same paint job, everything. It's just a 200cc. I think it's an old Honda type engine in there. But anyways, we bought the bikes new. We did the first service at 20 kilometers. The oil was quite dirty with metal filings in there. But anyways, we were worried that we're not going to make it. A lot of people said we're not going to make it out of the country even. But we said, well, whatever. If we break down and the bikes die, we'll just ship it back or leave it there and fly back home. So the first day we rode all the way to the Namibian border. It's a full day's riding. Through Namibia went fine, through Zambia went fine, Malawi went fine. So by this stage we trusted these bikes. This was almost halfway, well, a third of the way, a month later. And then, the first actual thing that qualifies as a breakdown, the bikes didn't stop, is we ended up riding at night in Tanzania on the western side. Someone said it's going to be a tar road all the way up. It'll take us a day or two, but it was not. It was a dirt road. It took us 7 days in mud and rain and dust. But that first night we were caught in the dark and we rode all the way to Sambawanga. That was 11:30 at night we got into town. There was no place to stay next to the road. And on that road our bulbs started rattling out. So my wife lost her headlight. I lost my tail light. So the first breakdown was bulbs just rattling out. And that happened right throughout the trip. I had a lot of replacements, so it wasn't a big issue. Now, the second breakdown was a bigger problem. The next day, after this crazy night, we were in the middle of nowhere. There's no cell phone signal. We don't even have anyone to phone. We're in the middle of the forest on this dirt road, and my bike just dies out after going over a little bump. So immediately I thought something rattled loose. So I start taking off the seat, replacing the CDI. I had a spare CDI, replaced the regulator, nothing. The bike just cranks but won't start. And after a while, my wife said, but it's almost like it's not getting fuel. And I didn't take the time to just relax and think things through, and she was right. So I drained the fuel from the carburetor float bowl, put it back, cranked it, and it started. So it must have been dirty fuel, but I didn't know this at this stage. So we rode to the hotel where we stayed that night. Next morning I took the carburetor out. Well, I opened it up. I just twisted it. I didn't know you can take it out even back then. So I removed the float, removed the jets, cleaned out the jets, sprayed everything with carb cleaner. And it started after that, but it wouldn't stay running. It would run for a while, then overflow from the fuel overflow. Then I need to close the tap, then it runs until it dies, then I open it again. So I had to ride like this, open, close, as it overflows from the overflow. So somehow I damaged the float, but I didn't know this. So I rode like this to town, about 10 kilometers, and the first mechanic we saw was this little tin roof with bikes lying on their heads in the dirt. And I just pointed to the carburetor. They immediately took it out, checked it, and they tried to set the float and then decided, no, it's not going to work. So they rode off on a bicycle, came back with a carb kit for that specific bike. Chinese bikes are everywhere in Africa. They replaced it about $10 later for the labor and the parts. We were on our way. But this guy was determined that I need to go for a test ride on the back. So I said, no. And he put me on the back of my bike and we rode through town, raced through town, through the buses without helmets. Just the scariest part of the whole trip. But anyways, the bike was fine and no problems after that. And I later realized it must have been from dirty fuel that we filled up from a can in Malawi. There was a shortage and we had to fill up from yellow cans behind the garage. So it must have been dirty fuel. So that was the second breakdown. The third major breakdown was on that same dirt road. This is now all the breakdowns on this one road. The mud was so thick that it packed on the disc brakes in the front and everywhere is just mud, and my bike just wouldn't brake anymore. There was so much mud jammed in the brake caliper and discs or pads. So stupid as I am, I took WD-40 or Q20 spray lubricant and I just sprayed the brakes good and proper, and obviously after that my brakes didn't work at all. So I rode on my rear brake through Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia. Well, in Kenya I fixed it. But anyways, so at least the mud was gone and my wheel would turn, because my wheel actually locked up. That's how I felt it. Now a wheel would turn, but it wouldn't brake because it's just contaminated with oil. That was the third breakdown. So nothing serious yet. So then we went through Rwanda, Uganda. Every 2,000 kilometers I would change the oil and wash out the oil strainer. I would adjust the chains every single day. And then in Kenya, we got a flat tire. Or I got a flat tire. It was thundering and raining. It was getting late. We were aiming for a nice spot to camp that we saw in the Lonely Planet. But then I got this flat and I couldn't repair it. So luckily we were in front of a hotel. But when I say a hotel, it was a building site that they were trying to make a hotel. And this guy, friendly guy, let us in, made tea. I tried to change the tire, but every time I pump it up, it would just deflate. And I saw there were small little tears in the spare tires that I had. So both spare tires had little tears in it. So the next morning, he took us in this old Toyota Cressida or Crown to the nearest tire repair shop. Again, I think $5 later, tire was repaired, new tube in, and we were on our way. And I think it was a nail that was in my tire. So that was the fourth breakdown. So then we reached Kenya, Nairobi. This was the halfway stop at the jungle junction. The whole place is full of overlanding trucks, bikes, people working on their bikes. There's a bike mechanic there. So I took our 4 days there while we waited for Sudanese visas to go through everything on the bikes. So I took a lot of stuff apart, cleaned out everything, made sure everything is still tight, the bolts and stuff. And I realized my chain is a bit stretched and the sprockets is starting to show wear. Now this was almost halfway. So this was about 4,000 miles, 4,500 miles in. And I almost thought of replacing the chain and sprockets there, but I thought, they're still fine. We've got a spare chain. Why not see if we can make it to Egypt? Now, that was a big mistake. But anyways, at the time, I thought it's a great idea. And the next day, we had to ride to Ethiopia. This was bandit country back then. It's a tar road now, but it's a road full of volcanic rocks. If you look at Charlie and Ewan's Long Way Down, you would see they broke their suspension on the GS. We also met people on a Hilux who broke their suspension. So we had to ride this road. So we took it slow, like 15 miles per hour the whole day. And we were worried about bandits. There was a French guy that was shot through his cheek 2 weeks earlier. So it was quite a anxious road to take. And somewhere through the day, I just felt something is wrong. And I stopped and I saw my chain bolt, the adjusting bolt on my chain has rattled out. So I couldn't adjust the chain anymore. Now the chain is slack and then it's tightened. So I ended up taking a flat piece of rock. There were so many rocks here. So a flat piece of rock, jammed it in there, cable tied it and then duct taped it. And that had to hold the tension in the chain. Anyways, we rode like that and I made it to the border of Ethiopia. But we had to be at the border at 6 o'clock. And about an hour before the border closed, my wife had a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. I replaced the tire quickly, the tube, and when I wanted to pump it, there was just mud spurting out of my cycle pump because of all the rain in Tanzania earlier. And luckily, a family from the UK stopped in an old Discovery 1 and they helped us change the tire or pump it up with a tire pump. We ended up not making the border. We had to stay in the worst place ever. I had so many bed bugs for 2 weeks after. But anyways, we made it. So that was the second flat tire and the 6th breakdown. The next morning, as I rode through to Ethiopia over the border, I felt my gearbox didn't feel right. I thought it was the end of the gearbox. I broke it, and I'll find a replacement engine and gearbox in Ethiopia. Because by this stage, we knew these bikes are all over Africa. So I didn't even worry. I just thought, well, even if it's $1,000 or whatever, I'll just buy a new engine and gearbox. But then I just checked again and I saw my chain was so tight. It was like completely straight. You couldn't move it at all. And it was obviously because of the adjusting bolt that rattled out. So I just bought a new bolt. It was a couple of cents. And I've just bought 6 or 7 of them because they kept rattling out at that stage. So bought a couple of them, put it back in, gearbox absolutely fine. So I was so impressed with my bike at this stage. Then, about 2 days into Sudan, we slept at a hotel. We actually parked the bikes inside the hotel because we were still worried that people will steal our luggage off it. But in Sudan, they just laughed at us. They said no one will even touch it or look at it. But anyways, we had it inside. Next morning, we got out of the hotel, saw my wife's tire is flat. So again, a staple. So this was the 3rd flat tire that was not a natural puncture. The first one was a nail, the second was a piece of glass. This was in Kenya, and this one was a staple. We quickly changed the tire. I bought a spare tire for dirt cheap there. Like I said, all these parts are freely available everywhere. There were a couple of guys watching me change the tire, and we had tea with them. So that was the 7th breakdown. And so from there on, we didn't have any proper breakdowns. We ran out of fuel in one of the oases in the western desert in the Sahara. There's nothing for 500 kilometers. Then there's a small little town. They call it an oasis, but it's just a town full of mud huts and stuff. And we were out of fuel in one of these small little towns. All the fuel stations were empty. And luckily, some restaurant owner said he has a can of fuel at his home. So we followed him home, and he cheated us and charged us 4 times the price of the fuel in Egypt. But that was still half of what we paid back home. So everyone won there. He thought he's cheating us and we got a bargain. So anyways, we rode off from there. And then the last day, and this was, I'm not joking, the very last day, we slept in the western desert in the dunes. We had to reach Alexandria that day. We had to be there because we had a flight back home 2 days later and we had to sort out the shipping. So we had about 600 kilometers or 400 miles to ride that day. And as I pulled out that morning, I could feel my bike wouldn't accelerate anymore without jerking quite heavily. My sprocket was shark tooth, front and rear. You could see as I tried to pull away, the chain lifted up. So I immediately stopped next to the road, replaced the chain with the new one, and then it wouldn't pull away at all. Back then I didn't know you can just swap around the sprocket or just turn it around. But anyways, I put back the old chain and nursed it. If you accelerate, when you pull away, you had to nurse it to get up to speed, and then it was fine after that. And I rode like that for 600 kilometers that day, and we ended up reaching Alexandria at 9 o'clock at night. It was pitch dark. It got dark at 5 p.m. So we rode in the dark. Our lights weren't working anymore. My wife's bike's horn didn't work anymore. We rode through peak traffic, 6 lanes this way and that. But anyways, we made it safe there, and the Chinese bikes made it. And we were like super impressed. The funny thing is, 2 days later, we had to ship it back. As we rode into the harbor, my bike died and it wouldn't start again. So I pushed it the last couple of meters to the shipping container. But it rode on its own steam into the harbor at least. So I see that as a win. So when the bikes eventually got home 2 months later on the ship, I fixed up my bike to commute with. And I rode it for, say, another 2 or 3 years after that, 20 miles to work, 20 miles back in the afternoon, without any issues. I never had any issues with my bike after it had a proper service back home. I think at the end, my bike had more than 20,000 kilometers on it. That's about, how much is that, 12,000 miles, without any issues. Engine was still perfect. I just set the valve clearance after 15,000 kilometers. It wasn't even far out. So my wife's bike was slightly out on the exhaust, and you could see a little burn there. But that was after 15,000 kilometers, no issues at all. So are Chinese bikes reliable? I don't know whether all of them are. These were Daihuns. You can see them all over Africa. If I had to ride through Africa again, I must admit I would feel safer on a Chinese bike just because there's parts available everywhere and it's easy to fix. And with my knowledge that I have now, I wouldn't worry at all because there's nothing really that you can't fix yourself. In the end, the bikes didn't leave us stranded. Every time we could make a plan. If I had to do this again, I would definitely consider a Chinese delivery bike again, just because there are parts available everywhere and the mechanics or the bush mechanics, they can all fix these bikes because they know these bikes. They look exactly the same everywhere. So if I had to go on my XR650L and something breaks and I need a part, I would have to order it and it had to be couriered there, and that could mean 2 or 3 weeks wait. So in the end, the Chinese bikes really made the trip very easy. We blended into the scenery or the locals. We didn't have any issues from police at checkpoints because they didn't understand these small bikes traveling. So let me know if you want to know anything else about this trip. If there's any questions that you want to ask about the trip from Cape to Cairo, let me know in the comments and I'll make a video on that. And thank you for joining. I'll see you next week.